then we just took a moment just to go in the room, his home room, just to see kind of what was happening after things had settled down a little bit. I had no idea that Trevor Steele had texted me and said, hey, if you're in the building, maybe look me up and pray with me. I hadn't even checked my social stuff. But I walk in the room, first seat I see, I just sat down, I looked over, and there was Trevor. I had no idea. I couldn't tell who people were because that, mask on and things. And so, but I just sat down, there he was, like God took care of it. Had me right where I needed to be. The administrator comes and said, we want to do a solemn assembly, a prayer, impromptu prayer time in his home room. Can you lead it? Of course I can lead it. And so we all gathered, and I was cold and chilly in the hallway, and by the time I got in that room and all those students got in that room, I was ready to take my shirt off. It was hot. It was hot and warm, all the body heat, all right, just packed in that room. Everybody, everywhere, no place to sit down, just packed, shoulder to shoulder like sardines. And I thought for just a few moments what I wanted to share with that group of middle school students. And I'm going to share with you the kind of a 4-point outline plan in my brain that I shared with them. I'm going to share it with you today. Because I think what we see in Daniel 1, 8 through 21, is what we need for a time like this. Okay? And I'll share with you a little bit about what we shared, what I shared in that room. And then we had Pastor Dave said a few words, and then we threw it open to anybody who would want to impromptu pray out loud. And you would have been so proud to see so many Stones Hill Community Church attendees, foundational families here at our church. Their faces were popping up in that room, here and there, just popping in. The guy's good. He's doing a good work there. And so, we had impromptu prayers, and then a few more words. I read a little out of Psalm 103 to kind of give people an idea of the kind of God we have to turn Zach over to. And then I offered, if anybody had from the community of the school, the students, if they had anything that they would like to share, anything that they would like to offer to the group. And you should have seen these little 7th, 8th graders. One little guy, still seeing glasses on, short-haired, about that tall, he was standing up, and you could just hear him processing in his mind the question of why, and all I could see was that big question mark at the end of that question, why, and I said, sometimes life is like you take that question mark on the end of why, you turn it upside down, it's like a big giant fish hook, and it just drives up into the human heart when you least expect it. Well, we had other middle schoolers who were offering their words as well. You would have been very impressed with those middle schoolers. Went down and hung out in the teacher's lounge, and I noticed someone had brought in pizzas and Subways and food trays. And it's like, you know what? I'm not real bright on some things, but like I surmise this is the place to be right now, right? Lots of good food. This is the spot. And middle school teachers get hungry too. And so they cleaned that stuff up. And I just kind of got to hang out right there and have a lot of impromptu conversations with a lot of teachers, covered just a lot of ground in a short period of time. In fact, I've been thinking about this week, I noticed the pizzas disappear a lot faster than anything else. And some of those teachers came in, and they were checking those pizza boxes, and there was nothing left in those pizza boxes. We know our next mission, don't we? Stones Hill Community Church is going to provide pizzas for all the teachers at some day in the future. Yeah, we're going to do that. Yeah. See, and that's probably a middle schooler right there that went, woohoo. See, that's a middle school employee. See that? So you'll be getting some pizzas, and you won't, nobody be turned away. They were looking. It's like you could just see they were so disappointed. There's no cheese and pepperoni. Come on, man. They saw those Pizza Hut boxes. You could just see. They're so ready. So hungry, from a hard day of helping a school process grief. We're going to get you some pizzas. And you won't run out. You'll have plenty. We'll do that down the road. As it turns out, Monday, tomorrow, Zach, 14-year-old, middle school student, I went and stood at his desk in homeroom. And if you looked out the window, he had a really great view of Stone Straits. If you got down in the corner and you looked that way, you almost see Stonesville Community Church. He's going to be laying right here. Right here. Monday. And Tuesday. Now, I want to tell you something. A couple things. One, all the people that clean the carpets here, that fix the plugged up toilets, that work on the roof, work on the basement, that tend to the paint jobs, okay? Don't ever underestimate the work you do to make a building presentable, because you would not believe how many times our church has been called on to be a ministry in times like this. So when you work on this building and you keep it tidy and you pay bills and you fix air conditioning units and heating units and you roof this place and you know what? It's used for funerals. It's used for weddings. Hey, you haven't seen a great wedding video until you've seen Hannah and Luke Wechter's wedding video. That drone starts out way up here. You see Stonesville Community Church from way up here, about 500,000 feet. Isn't that great? That drone just comes on down. You see the roof, the nice shiny maroon roof. I'm so glad we cut the grass that week. Good job on the grass cutting. Thank you so much for cutting that grass faithfully and weed eating. All the things that you guys have done to throw the grass out there and get it looking good. Drone comes on down. Camera shots comes inside the church. See the new decorations, the paint inside, all the carpet, and it's clean. Comes on down the aisle. This stuff happens up here. Great wedding video. Great, beautiful shots. Good narration. Okay? Weddings, funerals, don't underestimate what this building has meant and the people inside this building who have loved the people going through these life benchmark experiences in life. It's all valuable ministry. It's valid, and it's important, and you matter, and your work matters. So when you pick up trash, and you clean, you sweep, and you paint, and you unplug, and you unstop, and you pay bills, and you give each week, and you fix air conditioners so brides aren't sweaty, and you take care of heat so that families in grief don't freeze to death when we have to do a February funeral. You made that happen. And I notice it, and I see it, and it matters to me because I represent this. And when I was at that middle school this week, and I was invited to come into that middle school, it's because of you. And it's because of what God has done through our church, that we love the community. And yeah, we're a biblical worldview church, but everything it hinges on the fulcrum of love. It hinges on the fulcrum of love, and that's the tipping point. And so that's when the biblical worldview rubber meets the street. Biblical worldview means nothing unless it gets lived out, unless it's something that's observable in your life. It means nothing. It wasn't that long ago we had 3 bodies scattered across, situated in front of this church. 3 bodies. And you know that, you remember that story. Catholic tradition, they stayed in the church all night. Don't underestimate the power of a clean seat. If you're going to be sleeping on them all night, as the Catholic tradition has it, staying with the bodies. You see, all of life is ministry. It all counts. It matters. And so we want to be a robust, dynamic, powerful body in this neighborhood, because then it positions us to authenticate what we say we believe and the things that are important to us. And so I just want to commend you and just remind you of these things today. I think you probably know these things, but just to hear me articulate it and say it, this is a good place to be. It's a healthy place to be. And it's a good investment of your time and your ministry and your dollars and your commitment to this place. You can make this place what it is. You can create something very special here, and you already have. And so this morning, it's with those words that I just want us to revisit Daniel 1, 8 through 21. And so I just want you to let me walk through that and comment on a few things from it. And then I want to share with you the 4 things that guided my solemn assembly talk in Zach's homeroom on the 2nd floor of the middle school, where you can look out and see Stone Strays. I want you to know the 4 things that were principles. Basically, it's this right here. Are you ready to raise teenagers in today's world? I'm going to give you 4 things you got to do in order to see that happen. And Daniel is described as being 10 times better in our text today. Well, how can I raise a grandchild that's 10 times better than everybody else in the culture? I'm not trying to be better than anybody else, but what positions a teenager to thrive? Right? Well, there's no better time than today to talk to you about those 4 things. Zach needed those 4 things. You need those 4 things. Your family, your teenagers need 4 things. Are you ready for teenagers? You got to know those 4 things, okay? They're in our text. We're going to get to it at the end of it. And then, so not only that, but when you have those 4 things operating in your life, you're ready to be a fulcrum of love in a hostile culture. And what do I mean? A fulcrum, okay? It's a turning point. Everything pivots on this thing, right? So on one side, what we have in Daniel, you've got kind of a closed fist. I'm not embracing the values of Babylonian culture, and you're taking a stand and you're drawing a line, right? There's a time for that. On the other side of Daniel, you have an open hand. It's not just a closed fist over here, but it's an open hand that says, I can do that. I can modify. I'll assimilate on this point over here. And that's what Daniel did. I'll go to Babylonian schools. I'll wear Babylonian clothes. I'll live in Babylonian culture. I'll even assume, and if they call me by a Babylonian name, it's an open hand. I'll bend. I'll flex. I'll modify. I'll make it happen. He's got that going on one side of the discussion. On the other side of the discussion, he's got a fist that says, I'm not eating the royal food. If I don't draw a line somewhere in my life, and if I just totally cave into Babylonian culture, and I never draw a line, I never draw the fist and say, I'm not moving, this is my line, this is where I'm standing, and I am not going to take in food that's been dedicated to idolatrous Babylonian deities, and eating was not just something you did when you were hungry. It was like a spiritual interaction, and we lose that in our culture. But in their culture, it was a spiritual interaction with demonic and omens associated with it, and the demonic and the spirit world. All of that was involved, and Daniel said, "I can't do that." You got a fist on one side. I'm drawing a line. Open hand on the other side. You got a fulcrum right here. What's on the fulcrum? Love. It has to be love. And what you're going to see today in our text is the fulcrum that kept those 2 things in tension was love. All right? I'll modify, I'll assimilate where I can. I'll take a stand. I'm not moving and not budging where I need to. but in the middle, balance, love. Now, where do you get that, Pastor? Well, let's just read through it together and you'll see it. Okay? That the fulcrum of love is possible. I will say this and we'll read. The fulcrum of love is possible because of the fulcrum of God's sovereignty. And you're going to see that, hopefully, by the time I'm done here today. So if we pull it up on the slide, if you would, for me, quickly, and then we're up and running through this. So it's Daniel chapter 1, verses 8 through 21. We read it last week. But Daniel, verse 8 says, so he emerges as a leader for the group. Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, right? And so he makes this decision for all the reasons I've already shared. And he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Well, Pastor, how do you talk about the fulcrum of love that balances the closed fist and the open hand? Look what Daniel does. He asked the chief official. Does that sound like love to you? He wasn't obnoxious about it. I'm not eating this food. I demand better food. I demand kosher food and God bless food. And you know what? I'm going to sue you Babylonians for making me ingest this. And if you don't mind your culinary P's and Q's, I might even threaten a hunger strike. Is that his approach? Our nation has been crushed by you low-life Babylonian scum of the earth people. It wasn't his approach. Fulcrum of love. I can't do this. I will do this. There's got to be something that holds the two in tension and balance. Love. Look what he says. He asked the chief official. Isn't that beautiful? Don't confuse being godly with being obnoxious. When you're obnoxious, you don't get invited to middle schools. When you're obnoxious, you're not in situations to be a ministry because nobody likes obnoxious, in-your-face people. Right? Conviction does not excuse us from acting with sensitivity, tact, and respect regardless of a person's viewpoint or position on any controversial issue or topic. Although Daniel made up his mind, he went about it in a courteous way. He was Daniel. What does Daniel do? Daniel, who is a God is my judge. Okay, Daniel, Elohim, God. God was a part embedded in his name. He's going to lift up God, and the way he's going to lift up God, he's going to be tactful and courteous. He's going to do that in the fulcrum of love. He's going to keep everything in balance with the fulcrum of love at the center. So now, verse 9. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. Now that's an incredible word. What's going on? Well, because Daniel operated with the fulcrum of love as a priority, God's grace in this situation is shown to him. He was shown favor and compassion to Daniel. All right, this official showed favor and compassion to Daniel. So God's grace is so quiet here. We run right by it, hastening to see what happens in verse 10. And so we just hardly think about it. And all the noise, all the Babylonian noise drowns out the beauty of God's grace right here in the text. And the beauty is, and maybe I just ask you, have you ever loved somebody and you weren't sure why you loved them like you did? You ever had that experience? Yeah, some of you are like, yeah, I have no idea why I love that person. But it was that way with Daniel. The guy loved him and he wasn't sure why he loved him. And it was like one speaker says, some people show up and say, and they're thinking, here I am. Other people show up and they are thinking, there you are. Daniel was a second axiom person. When he walked into the room, it was not here I am, it's there you are. Wow. It's awesome, right? That was Daniel. It's the fulcrum of love, and that's Daniel's impact on this official. There was something about Daniel, this little Hebrew Jewish dude that wouldn't eat the king's cuisine. There was something about him that he favored and compassion. And I'll just share with you this morning, someday you're going to be going through a rough patch and you're going to face some hostile situation, some difficult place where maybe it's a contentious issue, and somebody is going to, for whatever reason, they're going to show you favor and compassion. And when that happens, I want you to do me a favor. And I want you to remember that someday you're going to be in a position to show favor and compassion to some Daniel who's fighting for his identity, doesn't know who he is altogether, trying to figure that out, trying to figure out where to close a fist and open a hand. You're going to find somebody in that position. And when you find them there, you remember, show grace and favor. God will use it incredibly in somebody's life. Verse 10, but the official told Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Verse 10, why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? So there's other young men conscripted from other nations, not just Israel, but other conquered nations. And his concern is that the king would then have my head because of you. Now, this is just a simple translation. So many words. I like y'all Jewish boys, but I like my head attached to my body a whole lot more. Notice, though, it wasn't an outright no. He doesn't say, no, we're not going to do that. He just says, here's why I'm hesitant to let you follow through with this plan, Daniel. It may not go well for you. And he's all about looks. You got to look the part for the king. If you don't look the part, it's your problem and it's my head. But he doesn't say no. Verse 11, Daniel then said to the guard. So he goes from the official to the guard. He's very careful about the chain of command. What's the fulcrum of love do? It's tactful, courteous. Fulcrum of love, what does it do? Follows the chain of command. See, in a hostile culture, you're going to have to ask some things of bosses, maybe even of your parents. Time permits today, I'll tell you about a pastor who was raised by 2 gay parents, and he had a fulcrum of love. He had to love and have compassion in a family that was just totally upside down, right? You're going to be in positions where you're going to take a stand. You're going to say, no, this is my line. This is my fist. I can't go there. And when you're in those positions, not only is it important to be tactful and courteous, but you follow the chain of command. You don't have to be obnoxious as you take a stand in hostile, dominant culture. You can still take your stand, but you don't have to do it in a hostile way. So verse 11 says, Daniel then said to the guard, whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, follows the chain of command, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He's like, we don't want to cause grief for you. We don't want to put you in a position where you feel threatened and you have fear. We understand there's people over you that have expectations of you, and we don't want to take advantage. We know it's a hostile environment. So he says, verse 12, please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. And so I don't think it's prescriptive. I think it's just God at work. I mean, if God can do this with them with just vegetables and water, and they can look great in 10 days, and not to mention 3 whole years, I don't think it's prescriptive. I don't think a vegetarian diet is being proposed here or prescribed. I have no problem with the Daniel plan. It's based on this. Lots of good things you can say about the Daniel plan. But what we have to realize, that's not the purpose of the passage. It's to present you a dietary plan. The purpose of the passage is that we have to Daniel was contending for a distinct identity in God, and he didn't want to become a mere consumer in a culture and be in alignment with Babylonian deities and their values. And God bless that. Daniel has something to offer. I think he has a sense for what God's going to do in his life. And when God starts showing Daniel visions and dreams, and Daniel hits the front pages of Babylonian press, and everybody realizes how great of insight this guy has, Daniel is setting this up in such a way that nobody can get the credit except for one God alone. Yahweh, Elohim, Daniel, Elohim. He's my God. So this is his way of saying, yeah, your Babylonian instructors aren't going to get the credit, okay? Learning all your literature is not getting the credit. Your new name for us not getting the credit. Me eating your food, that's not going to be the way it gets the credit. No, you're going to see that this is a God thing in me. Somebody said that to live a glorifying life is that you live your life in such a way that it changes someone else's view of God for the better. That's what it means to live a God-glorifying life. That somebody looks at you in your life and they think, there's something to that guy or that gal. And not only that, there must be something to their God, because obviously, and you're going to see it in a second, 10 times better. Wow. There's something about them. And so basically, verse 13, then compare our appearance with that of the young men, Daniel says, who eat the royal food and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. And so he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. God, for 10 days, show yourself strong. And I like experiments. I like 10-day projects. I think right now what's floating around is the 10-year challenge. And people show their picture in 10 years ago, and then they show their picture today and how it's been and how it's going, kind of contrast back and forth kind of deal. Sometimes that's helpful and things look better. Sometimes you can see the 10 years of age, right? I mean, it just can go either way. But I like the idea of experiment, and Daniel likes this idea, and maybe it's God's idea for you. You know? I talked to you last week about how basically the interpretational key for this first chapter, I think, is that Daniel says, okay, you guys confiscated our temple valuable treasures. You're going to desecrate our temple. Okay, you're messing with God's world now, but I'm not going to be defeated. God, live in me. God, live in me. They've defiled everything that's important to me spiritually, but I'm just going to let my body will be a temple. And I talked to you about that. And it begs the question, what defiles me? Right? And there's so many times in my life when Jesus wanted to be completely at home in me, and I've run him out. See, I've done that. Your pastor, see? I've run him out. And I wasn't a holy of holies in a holy place. See what I'm saying? I've run him out. And we run him out. Especially when we don't understand this tension between what to stand for and where to assimilate and what to flex on, and the fulcrum of love that balances those things and keeps them in tension in a culture that keeps me from being obnoxious to everybody in the world. Right? And we run him out. We run him out. What would it be? Maybe take 10 days, modify things, see how your outlook changes. Take 10 days, view life. Maybe you'll view life differently. Maybe you'll physically feel better. Maybe things will get better in your family. Just go 10 days. Maybe it's 10 days no porn. Maybe it's 10 days no drugs. Maybe it's 10 days no alcohol. 10 days no hookups. 10 days no news. 10 days. See what God does. It might be that you will look at yourself and your family, your husband, your wife, or your family will look at you and say, what's it? 10 days, man. I mean, you're doing great. You have energy. You're feeling good. You're getting rest. Maybe God's got a 10-day challenge for you. And just give it 10 days. Just give it 10 days and see what God does. Maybe it's 10 days of reading out of the book of Daniel. There's only 12 chapters. Maybe read Daniel in 10 days. Challenge your body, don't comfort it. Expand your knowledge, don't limit it. Lead a life of freedom and adventure, not one of mindless consumption. The culture wants to drag you into that cycle of mindless consumption and clickbaiting your life away. Daniel says, draw a line, assimilate where you need to, balance it all in love. Amen? This is what he's saying. This is what we're seeing here. 10 days. Verse 15, at the end of 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. God did his thing. So the guard took away their choice food, verse 16, and the wine, and they were to drink, and gave them vegetables instead. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. And don't read that last part too quickly, because when we get to chapter 2 next week, you're going to see how God uses Daniel to interpret a dream. And so this is very high value item in Babylonian culture to be able to do this. They felt that the God spoke through dreams and visions, and Daniel was now going to be interpreting Babylonian dreams and visions. And at the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, that is after 3 years, the chief official, verse 18, presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them. 19, he gave them their oral exams after 3 years of just holding in tension this fist and this open hand with the fulcrum of love, obeying God, drawing their lines, staying within their identity, who God calls them to be. The king talked with them. He gave them their oral exams, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. Amazingly so, and in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better. Hebrews says 10 hands better. What's that mean? Well, it's literally 10 hands superior to their peers. That means with their 2 hands, they were able to do the work of 5 people. My 2 hands was like the work 10 times better, or 5 other sets of hands. They were that much better than. Somebody said it's an overwhelming minority. And you know what I bet happened? And you're going to see it later. I bet you Daniel went from, I'm not going to be stamped by this Babylonian culture. I'm going to draw my lines. I'm going to assimilate where I need to, open hand, fist where I need to, draw my line, fulcrum of love. He did that for a long time. And you know what? I bet you, and we'll see it later, they had questions now about Daniel's culture. Whoa, 10 hands better? Where you come from? Who's your God? What's your language? What does that Daniel mean? And you know, if we flash forward, about 600, 700 years, there's 3 dudes from the east, probably on a camel, looking up in the heavens because the Babylonians loved astrology, and they see a star. Where'd they learn about that? Who told them? And that star comes to rest over that little town of Bethlehem. You see, Daniel knew where to draw the line, the fist. He knew how to open hand, assimilate where needed, on the fulcrum of love. And now all of a sudden, they wanted to know Daniel's culture. Tell us about your beliefs. Tell us about your God. Tell us about your values. Because now Daniel, because he's tactful, he's courteous, he follows the chain of command, he has the fulcrum of love as his priority. This guy's 10 times better. I want to know him better. You know what? Verse 21, and Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. He lived, I said this last week, he lived through 4 administrations. and they retained his services. Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar II, Belshazzar, and there was Cyrus, the Median Persian king. These changes of world empires, they retained Daniel. Why? 10 times better. Because he knew how to do this, this, and this. In the words of the commentator that I quoted last week, what verse 21 tells us is that Daniel did this, this, and this for about 60 solid years. And so he had a lot of grace and favor because God gave him such wisdom to maintain his distinctives in a culture that was secular by his estimation, and that was really messed up. But Daniel survived it. And you know what? The commentator said, quoting him last week, Babylon, this is quote, Babylon, the hairy-chested, macho Babylonian brute of the world, has dropped with a thud into the mausoleum of human history. While fragile Daniel, servant of the Most High God, is still on his feet. Are you ready to drop with a thud into the mausoleum of human history? People know what you stood for? Did you ever make a fist on anything? Ever draw a line for anything of value? Can they see your grace and peace? Can they see your wisdom in working in a secular culture and doing that with courteousness and love? Was the fulcrum of love the thing that balanced everything out, held it in tension, proper tension? I don't think you're ready to drop with a thud into the mausoleum of human history until you've lived life like Daniel chose to live it. When I was in Zach's homeroom this week, I was asked, can you just lead a prayer time? I said, yes, I can. No notes, no time to get on the computer and study this thing, no time to sketch out what I want to say, and it's just on the fly while other conversations are going. God, what do I need? What do I need? What do I need? You give me the word, give me the word, give me the wisdom. Okay? I need it, I need it, I need it. 4 things. I didn't say it this way. I said it much easier for a middle schooler to grab it. But it's basically what every teenager needs. First thing, identity. Who am I? You got to tell them who they are. We talked about stamping your child. What God made you. Are you going to let the Enuma Elish of the Babylonian creation story define you, Daniel? Where the gods basically duke it out and there's body parts from the battle and those body parts become human beings? Is that going to be your creation story, Daniel, here in Babylon? Or were you made by Yahweh Elohim, who speaks you into existence and holds you in high regard and speaks worth and value and creationary power and the breath of life into you, and you're a beautiful human being and you have life, and I don't care if there's emotional changes and physical growth changes and social pressures and spiritual questions and morality decisions and bullyings and teasings and respect issues that you've got to deal with. You have to take your identity from the God who said he made you, who's demonstrated as much. You have to, I told them who they were. That's what I told them. You have value, middle schoolers at West Noble. You have an identity God has spoken over you. And so many times, teenagers, I'll just add this in the sermon here, but teenagers search for identity along these common paths. They will react against family members. Well, sibling number 1 is the intellectual. That's taken. Sibling number 2 is the jokester. That's taken. Sibling number 3 is the athlete. That's taken. Sibling number 4, I'll be the black sheep. Nobody's done that yet. They will react against family members. Sometimes they seek an identity that way. Sometimes teenagers will seek status symbols. I'll be a skateboarder. I'll be a goth. I'll wear designer clothes. Maybe I'll even take a lot of pride in my Letterman's jacket. A status symbol. I'll look for identity in a status, something I possessed. Maybe I'll look for identity in a group to belong to. Somebody that listens to the same music or wears the same kind of clothes. Or maybe I'll engage in cliquish exclusion to try to solidify the identity that I want to have. I'll exclude others. Sometimes teenagers react against family members. They look to status symbols. Sometimes they will experiment with grown-up behavior. Let me do things that grown-ups do, see how I like it, drinking and drugging and the sexing and all those things. I'll just try the grown-up stuff and just see if that helps me in my identity. Maybe I'll just totally rebel and be a nonconformist. Maybe I'll idolize people, rock stars, athletes, actors. Somebody tell me who I am. So for 2 or 3 minutes, I just, in that homeroom, looking out, seeing stone strays, I just told them who they were. You got to do that with your family. We have to do it as a church. This is who you are. You've been stamped by a creator God. Second thing I told them, so many words, responsibility. Middle schoolers, you got to choose life. It's your responsibility to choose life. And you have to choose the attitudes that you will do life with. We can't blame other people. We have to take responsibility for this life that God has given us, even if we are a captive. And Daniel could have spent his time complaining about what a bad leader Nebuchadnezzar was, blaming the exile for all of his unhappiness, feeling sorry for himself for being conscripted as a eunuch and totally immersed in culture shock, critiquing reality in such a way that anybody could listen with his negative spin. That could have been Daniel, but it wasn't Daniel. We don't see that in Daniel. We see this on a fulcrum of love. And that's your responsibility. It's not your mom, it's not your daddy, it's not your teacher, it's not your pastor, it's not your friends, not your teammates. It's your responsibility to choose the attitudes and take responsibility for your behavior and the things that you do. I talked to him about responsibility. Not quite like that, but very similar. Okay, in terms of identity, responsibility, you have to choose life. Third thing, authority. What role will I respect? Whose rules will I follow and respect? Because authority figures are everywhere. How long should I follow them? How far should I follow them? Because life in Babylon undermines authority. You're not ready for the teen years until you understood identity, responsibility, and thirdly, authority. And understanding that, you know what? There's somebody I have to respect. There's a higher law I have to follow. It's not my parents, it's God. And he's the ultimate chain of command. You gotta understand that that's a decision we have to make. Fourth thing is conformity. What lifestyle will I choose? Which road will my life take? Life in a Babylonian culture wants to shape you and conform you, isolate you, confuse you, and get you to a place where you don't know what is up and down, black and white. You have no sense of right and wrong, and you're lost in this quagmire, and all of a sudden, now you're stamped by a culture that wants you to conform to the values of that culture. It's just kind of interesting to me. I thought about this yesterday. I don't think that Apple had anything to do with this, and maybe I'm not even thinking this way, but isn't it interesting that digital Babylon that we have in our pockets has an apple on it with a bite out of it? You ever think about that? I don't think it was an apple in the garden. It was some kind of fruit you would ingest, but it's just kind of interesting to me. It's an apple with a bite out of it. That's what digital Babylon wants you to do. Take the bite. And what I'm sharing with you today, and I'll hasten on here, this is just beautiful to me. I love how Daniel does this quickly now. he does this. He was tactful in the way he spoke. Please test your servants. Secondly, he was obedient in following the chain of command. He follows that. Thirdly, his request was reasonable. Just give me 10 days. Fourthly, it was easy to evaluate. Tension. I can't do. Things I can do. Fulcrum of love. That's what Daniel, that's how he lived his life. And that's how you and I can live our life. And when we do, you're so remarkably different. You're in a position to bring glory to God 10 times better, is how it was described for Daniel. I'm going to close with this. This is slide number 29. This is like a slice of real life. It's in a book called Messy Grace. It's how to love people in a hostile culture. Caleb Kaltenbach shares his story, and it's how a pastor with gay parents learned to love others without sacrificing conviction. It's about a young man who had to figure out what identity, responsibility, authority, and conformity would mean in his life personally. And it's a young man who had to take a stand when both of his parents represented a value system he didn't necessarily buy into later in life. So how do you do this? Fist, open hand, fulcrum of love. How is he going to live life this way? Well, Caleb had a mom who was lesbian. She had a female partner. And Caleb had a dad who was secretly gay. And he split time between both parents. And so he grew up in the LGBT community. And so he knows it from the inside. It's interesting that he was born in 1978, according to his book. Columbia, Missouri, 2 years of age, parents divorced. His mom started acting strange, going to more parties. I'm going to shorten this story as quickly as possible here. Going to more parties, met her partner, Vera, who was a PhD counseling psychology student, and graduated, teacher. And now his mom and Vera moved to Kansas City, where Vera opens a counseling practice. And Caleb's mom started working at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. His dad stayed in Columbia and taught in the university there. He was closeted. He was in the closet with his sexuality, and both of his mothers were in fact lesbians, and this was his world. This was where he lived. This was his Babylonian culture. He spent summers with his mom and Vera. They went to LGBT clubs, late night parties, parades, campouts, lesbian comedians, concerts all over Kansas City. Their friends became his friends. And he said they were fun people. They were so creative and hospitable. He said, unfortunately, I saw a lot of things I should have never seen at a young age at these parties. But he understood his parents wanted him to be cultured. They wanted him to be Babylonianized. They signed him up for art classes and acting classes, and they wanted him to know this world. He said his mom and Vera had instilled a hate in him. They told him that Christians hate gay people. And it was affirmed at a KC Pride parade. I'm not going to tell you all the things he saw there, but at the end of this parade, without fail, there was always a group of people that his mom and Vera would point at and say, see, that's the Christians, and they always held up the big placards about how much God hates people like this. This little guy, and that's what he grew up with. That was his Babylon. Well, he says his mom signed him up for a writing class at UMKC, and he said, I met a girl in this class. She's just like a little mini version of Whitney Houston. And he got to know her and got acquainted with her, and he said, little Miss Whitney, for some reason, had favor and grace and compassion for me, kind of like Daniel experienced. for some reason, had compassion for me, and she took the LGBT community I was a part of, she took that in stride, my parental situation, she took that in stride. She wrote me a letter. It's a writer's class. She wrote me a really nice letter telling me about Jesus and the gospel and the beauty of a biblical worldview. We got to talk a little bit about that. We went separate ways, but I never forgot that little mini Miss Whitney Houston was so unlike the people at the parades holding up the placards telling people how much Jesus hated them. He said it really stuck with me. Reality hits him, though. He said, I always felt like I was competing with Vera, my mom's girlfriend. I was always competing with Vera for my mom's attention. Vera was 10 years older, he says, and she had a couple of children. And so his mom wanted him to view Vera as another mother, but he said, I just couldn't do that. And she seemed to resent Caleb. And he was caught in this strange world between a fist and an open hand, the fulcrum of love, trying to figure out how he was going to balance it, especially when he learned that Vera hated men and was disgusted by things that boys like to do. Identity crisis. Well, he could feel the tension. And he'll tell you today, as a pastor and student of the Bible, he'll tell you that he agrees with God's plan and what the Bible teaches. He understands that Jesus showed dignity and tact and respect for people of any position or persuasion, and yet at the same time, he never ever assumed a sideline parade poster stance where he stood in the background and declared how much God hated. He never saw Jesus doing that, and he purposed in his life he was going to hold that in the fulcrum of love and balance. He says some other things. He reaches high school. He discovers a Bible study in Columbia, Missouri. It's led by a college campus pastor. He loved that study group. He loved learning about Jesus. The total acceptance of the group of him, regardless of his family situation, how much they loved him. And he got to a place in a Bible study where he says, I want Jesus to come into my life. And he opened up his life and he understood that this is going to be hard because it's going to throw up barriers with gay parents, with a mom who was loud and proud, with a partner who hated men, and a dad who was in the closet with his sexuality, and he hated and railed against conservative Christians. Caleb said, in spite of all of that, I had to draw the line. I had to say yes to Jesus. And he did. Before he left that baptism service with his pastor, his college pastor wisely looked at him and told him, Caleb, you love your parents. Fist, open hand, fulcrum of love. You balance that, Caleb. Jesus is your highest loyalty, but you love your parents. Well, he went home and he told his dad. And his dad and he just kind of stared at each other for, I don't know what, I feel to be like several minutes. His dad just couldn't believe what he heard. Of course, his dad resists, and he tells his dad, he's so tactful. Caleb is so tactful. He tells his dad, I didn't do this because I wanted to insult you or mom or anybody else. He says, I felt God wanted me to do this. He was so tactful. His dad takes him to McDonald's in Concordia, Missouri, off of I-70 there. And then they meet his mom. The mom picks him up. That was their drop-off pickup point for several years there in Concordia, Missouri, in the McDonald's. And when Caleb gets in his mom's car to go back on to Kansas City, his dad looks at his mom and says in a very sarcastic voice, have fun on your 90-mile drive home. Have fun on this ride. She was puzzled by what it meant. They had a 90-minute car ride home, and Caleb told her that he had given his life to Jesus. And she said she felt like he had gone over to the enemy, that her son Caleb is now a part of the Christian haters group. He said it was awful for 90 minutes. They pull into the garage. Caleb sits in the car for 15 minutes. He could see through the window and the door in the garage into the house. His mom's arm is around Vera. Vera's arm is around his mom, and she's sobbing on the couch with disbelief and anger and betrayal. And all he can do is sit in the car for 15 minutes and look at what this has created in his family. He finally gets the courage to go inside, and Vera sets him down for the Great Inquisition. Caleb, do you realize the amazing opportunity you have been given to be raised by two women? Do you not know that you are siding with the bigots when you say you accept Jesus? He said, Vera, I'm a Christian, but I still love you. I love you, and I love my mom, I love my dad, and nothing can change that. He was so tactful. And Vera said, well, so you believe that your mom and me, that we're living in sin then, now that you're a Christian? He said, well, if the Bible says it is, then it is. Chain of command, right? Chain of command. God's word. Well, we've heard enough. And Vera gave him a hard stare before stomping off to bed. He goes to a youth conference. He accepts the call to ministry. He goes to Ozark Christian College to prepare for ministry. And his parents go ballistic again. If you choose this route, Caleb, you're picking it over your mother and me, and you're basically disowning us. You know what? I'm not paying for college. And he comes back and he says, listen, my love for God and my call to ministry don't change the way I feel about you. I love you and Mom. Love. He went to Christian college. He prepared to become a pastor, which he did become. He also came home on breaks from college, and he continued to go to the parties and social scenes with his mom because he loved his mom, he loved her friends, and he still loved his closeted gay dad. Several years passed. Caleb's mom's partner of 22 years, Vera, was diagnosed with cancer, and she's growing weary in the fight. He gets a ticket home, flies home with the plan of staying 5 days. They turned the dining room into a hospice room as Vera was facing her final days. And he was praying, God, give me an opportunity to talk to my mom's girlfriend of 22 years. I want her to be able to have the assurance of life in heaven with Christ. And all through the week, there was never an opportunity. Vera would always read a book, or she'd just sit in quiet silence. There's a lot of tension in the house. And on his final night, Vera woke up during the night. Her mind seemed clear, and she asked Caleb out of the blue, so Caleb, what do you think is on the other side? Well, among other things, he said, Jesus is on the other side. And he said, for a moment, I thought she'd put her hands up and start singing, I surrender all. She said, Caleb, do you know what I really want to know, what I think is about you and what I think's on the other side? And what I believe about people who love Jesus? What? She said, I think you are weak. I think you and all the Christians you are around use Jesus as a crutch because you're not strong enough to make it through life on your own. She's days from death. Vera told him, I want no part of your Jesus. When the funeral was held on the plaza in downtown Kansas City, I've actually ran a race through there. It's a beautiful venue, a beautiful place. There was no prayer in the funeral. There was no worship songs. There was no preaching. Hear me, church. Vera dropped with a thud into the mausoleum of human history. Devastated, his mom went through some bad relationships. She ended up moving closer to Caleb in Texas. All of Caleb's church family showed up, helped her move into her new apartment. She received Jesus. His dad retired from his job in Columbia, Missouri, moves to Texas. His church once again helps his dad find an apartment, move in. He gives his life to Jesus. And they both are seeking a new identity in the Savior. Truth, open hand, fulcrum of love. Love your people. Stand your ground. Draw your line. Stamp your child. Live your life. And I got a question. Are you ready to drop like a thud into the mausoleum of human history? Is Jesus your fulcrum? Is he going to be the thing that holds the tension between, in this hostile dominant culture, between things you cannot do, things you were willing to do? What's your fulcrum? You're not ready to drop with the thud until Jesus is your fulcrum. Do you need him this morning? Would you like him to be your fulcrum? To balance everything on him and his love. Even if you have gay parents, even if you've got you're caught up in weird cultural, hostile, dominant debates and conversations, no matter what it is, let Jesus be your fulcrum. Will you pray with me? Father, thank you so much this morning for your love and grace. Thank you so much for what you've brought us through this week. And I just know I am not ready to drop with a thud into the mausoleum of human history until you've become my fulcrum. Will you be that for me? I want you more than anything else in the world to be that fulcrum by which I gauge and calibrate my life and make my decisions. And however you want to use us in this community, would you help us to be courteous and tactful and kind? Would you help us never to bend and bow on the foundational truths of the Bible? But would you give us the wisdom to know how to move and work and assimilate when the situation and context would call for it? And so at the end of the day, they'll look at us. Maybe we won't be a full 10 times better, but then again, maybe we will be. And the reason is Jesus was our fulcrum. And that they never missed. And so whatever you got for us to do, wherever you've got for us to go, we give it all we've got for your glory. You be our fulcrum today in your name. Amen. Will you stand with me? You've been a great group. Now you go in God's grace and peace and keep growing in him 10 times better. That's who you are. Amen. So be it. Be dismissed.